During the Middle Ages, Europe and the Middle East were divided into two major realms: Christian states, collectively known as Christendom, and Muslim states. These regions were often at odds and frequently engaged in warfare. At the forefront of this conflict stood the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, the dominant Christian power in the Eastern Mediterranean. However, in the 11th century, a new threat emerged: the Seljuk Turks. Originally from Central Asia, the Seljuks had embraced Sunni Islam and established a vast empire. In 1071, they dealt a devastating blow to the Byzantine Empire at the Battle of Manzikert, which led to the Seljuks seizing most of Anatolia. Iconic Christian cities like Nicaea and Antioch fell under their control. The death of Sultan Malik Shah in 1092 resulted in the fragmentation of the Great Seljuk Empire, further weakening their hold on the region. As local warlords began to raid Byzantine lands, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I Comnenus sent an urgent plea to Pope Urban II for military aid. While this wasn't the first request of its kind, this time it sparked a monumental response. Pope Urban II saw the appeal as an opportunity to address the rift between the Eastern and Western churches following the Great Schism. He also sought to assert his authority over unruly barons and bishops in Western Christendom. But most importantly, Urban envisioned a holy war to recapture Jerusalem, the most sacred site in Christianity, which had been under Muslim control for nearly 400 years. In 1095, Pope Urban addressed a gathering in Clermont, France, calling on Christian knights and soldiers to march eastward and liberate Jerusalem. To motivate them, he offered a profound spiritual incentive. Anyone who goes to Jerusalem to free the Church of God will be absolved of all penance. This promise appealed deeply to Europe's knights, many of whom feared damnation due to their violent lifestyles, and the promise of redemption drove them to take part in this extraordinary campaign. Urban's words ignited a wave of religious fervor across Europe. His call was met with cries of Deus vult, meaning God wills it. Thousands of people, both noble and common, answered the Pope's call, forming what became known as the Crusaders. While some sought wealth and glory, most embarked on this perilous journey in search of spiritual salvation. Though Pope Urban had envisioned the crusade being led by the nobility, his appeal inspired a much larger group, including ordinary townsfolk and peasants. Among them was Peter the Hermit, a French priest who became the leader of the so-called People's Crusade. Along their journey, many of these crusaders, inflamed by religious zeal, attacked Jewish communities in the Rhineland, resulting in thousands of deaths and mass extortion. By the summer of 1096, the People's Crusade, numbering between 20,000 and 40,000, began its march eastward. Ill-prepared and poorly organized, they faced hardship early on, even looting Christian settlements in Hungary. When they reached Constantinople, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I quickly arranged for their transport to Anatolia, hoping to rid himself of the unmanageable group. However, the Crusaders were ambushed and destroyed by the Seljuk Turks. Meanwhile, Europe's most powerful feudal lords set out with better preparations. Notable leaders included Godfrey of Bouillon from Lorraine, Hugh of Vermandois, Count Robert of Flanders, and Duke Robert of Normandy, among others. Together, they formed a massive army of approximately 60,000 men, the largest seen in Europe since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Upon reaching Constantinople, the Crusaders caused concern for Emperor Alexius, who had expected a small mercenary force. Tensions rose, especially with Bohemond of Taranto, who had a history of hostility towards the Byzantine Empire. After swearing oaths of fealty, the Crusaders were allowed to cross into Anatolia. The Crusaders, especially the armored knights, faced a challenging environment, contending with the heat, terrain, and hit-and-run tactics of the Turkish forces. Fortunately, the Seljuk Empire was weakened by internal divisions, and its leaders were not prepared for the Crusader assault. The Crusaders' first major victory came at Nicaea, which surrendered to the Byzantines after a lengthy siege. This caused friction between the Crusaders and Byzantines, who were at odds over the spoils of war. Marching deeper into Anatolia, the Crusaders faced their first significant challenge near Dorylaeum, where they were ambushed by a large Turkish force. Despite being surrounded and under heavy attack, the Crusaders held their ground. The timely arrival of Godfrey's rearguard turned the tide, and the Turks were routed. As they advanced, the Crusaders faced more obstacles, including starvation, disease, and hostile terrain. Yet they pressed on, with some leaders such as Baldwin of Boulogne securing land for themselves along the way. Baldwin eventually became Count of Edessa, establishing the first Crusader state. By October 1097, the Crusaders reached Antioch, the last major Turkish stronghold before Jerusalem. However, Antioch's formidable fortifications made it nearly impossible to capture. The Crusaders faced severe shortages of food and morale sank, but a miracle seemed to offer hope. The discovery of the Holy Lance, a relic said to have pierced Christ's side, reinvigorated the Crusaders' spirits. In a daring night assault, Bohemond of Taranto and his men scaled Antioch's walls, opening the gates for the Crusader army. After a brutal massacre of soldiers and civilians, the city fell. However, a massive Turkish army, led by Kurbuga, was on its way to recapture Antioch. The Crusaders, now starving and exhausted, faced annihilation. Yet in another miracle, the Crusaders, filled with religious fervor, defeated the much larger Turkish army. Kurbuga withdrew, and the defenders in the citadel soon surrendered. Antioch was theirs. In 1098, the Crusaders, now divided and weakened, spent months in Antioch before continuing their march to Jerusalem. Along the way, they encountered resistance from the Fatimid forces in Egypt, but many local rulers offered supplies to avoid conflict. As they neared Jerusalem, the Crusaders faced the daunting challenge of besieging the city, now under Fatimid control. By June 7th, 1099, the Crusaders finally sighted Jerusalem, and their resolve was strengthened. However, they were underfed, exhausted, and lacked the resources for a proper siege. They constructed siege towers from wood gathered locally and began their assault on June 13th. After several failed attempts, they managed to breach the city walls on July 15th, 1099. The Crusaders flooded the city, where they conducted a horrific massacre, killing Muslims, Jews, and civilians alike. Jerusalem was taken, and the Crusaders had achieved their ultimate goal. Just weeks later, the Crusaders defeated a Fatimid relief army at the Battle of Ascalon. With Jerusalem secured, most Crusaders returned to Europe, but around 300 knights, led by Godfrey of Bouillon, remained to defend the city. Bohemond of Taranto claimed Antioch for himself, despite breaking his oath to the Byzantine Emperor. Pope Urban II, who had initiated the crusade, died just 2 weeks after Jerusalem's fall, never knowing the success of his call. The Crusader states, Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, and Edessa were established but remained under constant threat from Muslim forces. The Muslim world, eventually united under leaders like Salah ad-Din, would not let the Crusader states stand for long, leading to nearly 200 years of conflict in the Holy Land.